The illusion of free will in the modern age.
This. We believe our thoughts, morals, and career choices are entirely our own, born from independent consciousness. But what if your most deeply held beliefs, your anxieties, and your daily grind are meticulously programmed by an invisible, cold, mechanical force? History is not driven by the ideas of geniuses, but by the relentless, grinding gears of material reality. You think your burnout is a personal failure. You believe your exhaustion stems from not working hard enough. But what if your daily anxiety, your career bottlenecks, and your sense of emptiness are meticulously programmed by the invisible structure of the modern workplace? We are not going to talk about distant utopias today. We are going to use the cold, analytical razor of historical materialism to dissect your 9-to-5 life, helping you see through corporate gaslighting and reclaim control over your own existence. Chapter 1: The Illusion of Free Will. How Material Reality Programs the Mind. Most of us navigate our lives under a grand, comforting illusion. We believe that our thoughts, our morals, our career choices, and our deepest ambitions are entirely our own, born from an independent and sovereign consciousness. We are told by countless self-help gurus and corporate mentors that mindset is everything. Change your mind, they say, and you will change your reality. This is the pinnacle of philosophical idealism, and in the context of the modern workplace, it is a beautiful, manipulative lie. Historical materialism shatters this illusion with a brutal, unforgiving truth. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. This is the fundamental premise that separates the dreamers from the architects of reality. Let us translate this abstract philosophy directly into the reality of your daily life. Your social being is not some distant academic concept. Your social being is the physical architecture of your office cubicle. It is the exact numerical value of your monthly paycheck. It is the geography of your commute, the fluctuating cost of your rent, and the demographic pressure of millions of other individuals competing for the exact same position. According to the core tenets of materialism, the geographic environment and population factors are the necessary prides for your existence. In the modern context, this means the city you live in and the density of your competitors mathematically dictate your baseline level of stress and survival. These tangible, physical conditions form an invisible cold, mechanical matrix, strictly programs what Marxist philosophy calls your social consciousness. Your daily anxieties, your desires, your values, and your very definition of success. Consider the modern hustle culture. Why do capitalist societies value hyper-individualism and glorify working 80-hour weeks? You might genuinely think you value relentless, hard work because you are naturally ambitious and driven. In reality, your ambition is often a programmed psychological response to an economic base that demands the maximum extraction of your time and energy. Social psychology is a direct reflection of social being, constantly shifting as your material conditions change. The system rewards those who willingly commodify themselves, and it punishes those who set boundaries. When you feel the crushing weight of peer pressure in the office, or when you fear that taking a single week off will completely derail your career trajectory, you are not experiencing a personal psychological weakness. You are experiencing the heavy, invisible hand of economic determinism. Your burnout is not a personal flaw. Your exhaustion is not a failure of character. It is a structural, calculated consequence of operating within a machine that is explicitly designed to consume your surplus value. We are meticulously taught to tie our utmost self-worth to our corporate job titles. We are conditioned to buy things we do not need, using money we do not truly have, simply to impress people we do not actually like. This is not inherent human nature. This is the manufactured social psychology generated by a very specific mode of production. The economic machine requires constant consumption and relentless labor to sustain itself, and therefore, it must program your mind to perpetually desire the carrots it dangles while fearing the stick of poverty. Once you intellectually accept that your mind has been programmed by your material reality, the heavy burden of individual guilt begins to fade. You stop blaming yourself for the pointless emptiness of the rat race. You stop believing that you can simply meditate or visualize your way out of a structurally flawed economic hierarchy. You attain a cold, analytical clarity. You stop being a passive participant, drowning in stress, and you begin to actually see the matrix governing your life. Chapter Summary: Your mental health, ambitions, and workplace. Anxieties are not isolated, personal traits, but direct psychological reflections of your physical and economic environment. True clarity begins only when you recognize the extent to which material reality programs your mind. Chapter 2: The Invisible Gears. Technology, labor, and the chains we wear. If social being programs your mind, as we established in Chapter 1, what exactly programs social being itself? The answer lies in the most brutal and unforgiving mechanical engine of human history: the conflict between productive forces and the relations of production. To understand why your workplace feels increasingly hostile, we must stop looking at corporate policies and start looking at the underlying machinery of human progress. History is not a romantic timeline of kings, presidents, or visionary geniuses. History is the cold mechanical evolution of how we produce things and who owns the tools used for that production. Productive forces represent the absolute limit of human technological capacity. It includes the laborers, the raw materials, and most importantly, the tools and technology available. Conversely, the relations of production represent the invisible architecture of ownership, the legal contracts, the property rights, and the hierarchical structure dictating who reaps the profits generated by those tools. For decades, we have been fed a dangerous lie. We are taught that technological progress automatically translates into human liberation. We believed that as computers and artificial intelligence exponentially increased output, we would naturally transition into a utopian era of leisure, working only 15 hours a week. Yet, look at the reality of the modern gig economy. Look at the relentless march of automation as algorithms threaten to eradicate millions of white-collar jobs. Why does unprecedented technological wealth create unprecedented individual anxiety? This is the ultimate contradiction of progress. According to historical materialism, productive forces are radically dynamic, constantly pushing forward and evolving. However, the relations of production, the capitalist framework of private ownership, are inherently rigid, designed to lock in the wealth and power of a specific elite class. When human technological capacity outgrows these outdated rules of property and ownership, the entire system violently fractures. Consider the extreme tension between tech billionaires and alienated laborers. The tools of artificial intelligence and global logistics have centralized unimaginable wealth into the hands of less than 1% of the population. Meanwhile, the actual creators of that wealth, the engineers, the delivery drivers, the middle managers, are reduced to replaceable metrics, forced to compete against the very machines they helped build. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed. The owners of the productive forces extract maximum surplus value while pushing the cost of technological disruption down onto the laborer. You are not merely an employee. You are a human being caught in the crushing gears of a macro-historical contradiction. As the algorithm learns to do your job in 3 seconds, the rigid capitalist relations of production ensure that you do not get your time back. Rather, you lose your livelihood. The chains we wear today are not forged of iron. They are written in source code and corporate profit margins. And until we recognize this fundamental mechanical flaw, we will continue to be ground down by the very technology that was supposed to set us free. Chapter Summary: The root cause of modern workplace. Anxiety is not a lack of effort, but the extreme mechanical contradiction between exponential technological progress and a rigid system of private ownership that funnels all resulting wealth to the elite. Chapter 3: The Shadow Empire. Why laws, morals, and art serve the base. Having examined the brutal gears of the productive forces, we must now confront the most deceptive illusion of modern society. Why does a corporation, an entity designed exclusively for profit extraction, constantly feed you the warm narrative that we are a family? Why does the legal system severely punish a hungry individual for stealing bread, yet swiftly bail out a corrupt banking executive who vaporizes billions of dollars? To pierce through this phenomenon, we must wield the most penetrating analytical scalpel of historical materialism. The dialectical relationship between the economic base and the superstructure. Marxism coldly reveals a fundamental law of human architecture. The economic base, which consists of the property rights, the ownership of capital, and the underlying method of exploitation, inevitably constructs a superstructure, perfectly tailored to protect it. This superstructure is not merely the government. It encompasses the state, the police, the courts, and most insidiously, the ideological apparatus, the morality, the media, the culture, and the corporate human resources department. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. The superstructure exists for one singular historical mission: to camouflage, defend, and perpetuate the exploitation engineered by the economic base. Let us project this macro-level philosophy directly into the reality of your daily labor. In any modern enterprise, the economic base is the relentless drive for capital accumulation and the cold extraction of your surplus value. The superstructure represents the inspiring slogans painted on the office walls, the mandatory team-building retreats, the toxic positivity promoted by management, and the entire human resources infrastructure. Have you ever naively believed that human resources exists to protect your well-being? Discard that delusion immediately. Under the iron law of materialism, human resources is a defensive mechanism of the capitalist superstructure. Their empathetic tone and mental health seminars are merely the lubricant applied to the grinding gears of exploitation. When your personal interests directly contradict the profit margins of the base, this very system will categorize you as a redundant asset and optimize you out of existence, wrapping a cold financial decision in the flawless corporate jargon of structural reorganization. Why must the corporate elite endlessly fabricate the ideology of a workplace family, because it is the most efficient form of psychological domination. If a corporation openly stated, "We purchase your time simply to extract maximum profit," the transaction would remain cold and mathematical. You would never willingly surrender your evenings and weekends unpaid. However, by utilizing the superstructure to package this naked transaction as a shared vision or a brotherhood, they successfully colonize your consciousness. This is what Marxist philosophy defines as false consciousness. It weaponizes your natural human desire for belonging and meaning, inducing you to voluntarily surrender your statutory rights and bind your entire self-worth to their arbitrary performance metrics. This explains why the modern office is saturated with toxic positivity. Any genuine complaint, any request for fair compensation, punctures this elaborate ideological camouflage and directly threatens the smooth operation of the economic base. When you feel deep shame for failing to meet an unrealistic key performance indicator, you are actually using the moral standards of the ruling class to judge and condemn yourself. Once you see through this architecture, you can forge an armor of cold rationality within your mind. You will no longer feel guilty for refusing unpaid overtime. You will stop doubting yourself for failing to assimilate into an aggressive, predatory corporate culture. You finally understand that the warm narratives of the workplace are merely tools of systemic control. Never sacrifice your authentic human essence and deep emotional capacity to a commercial entity dictated entirely by profit and loss. Chapter summary. The legal systems, small frameworks, and corporate cultures we live under are not neutral. They are meticulously engineered superstructures designed exclusively to justify and protect the wealth extraction of the economic base. Chapter 4. The myth of the hero. Who actually builds the world? We are constantly bombarded by the corporate myth of the visionary genius. If you open any modern business magazine or scroll through professional networking platforms, you are relentlessly commanded to worship the celebrity chief executive officer, the Silicon Valley founder, or the billionaire investor. We are thoroughly conditioned by the great man theory of history, which falsely suggests that singular, exceptional individuals propel human civilization forward through sheer willpower and unmatched intellectual brilliance. This manipulative narrative insidiously whispers that your company only survives because of the brilliant strategic leadership at the absolute top, and that you, the ordinary salaried employee, should feel profoundly grateful just to receive a paycheck. Historical materialism completely obliterates this arrogant and self-serving myth. It forces us to ask a highly dangerous philosophical question. Who actually builds the world? Marxist theory definitively answers that the masses are the true and only creators of history. The singular historical figure, whether it be a famous emperor or a modern tech billionaire, is merely a product of the specific practical activities and accumulated material conditions provided by the ordinary workers. To grasp this concept, we must understand the dialectical relationship between historical necessity and historical accident. Let us examine the technological titans of our era. The myth tells us that without these specific geniuses, we would not have personal computers or electric vehicles. Dialectical materialism coldly corrects this. The invention of these technologies was a historical necessity, driven by the general advancement of productive forces, the global accumulation of microchip engineering, battery science, and internet infrastructure was entirely built by the anonymous masses of researchers and factory workers, the specific individual who eventually patented the final product was merely a historical accident. If that specific chief executive officer had never been born, the accumulated pressure of the productive forces would have inevitably propelled another individual into that exact same role to fulfill the societal need. Historical figures merely surf the massive economic waves generated by your collective sweat. They do not create the ocean itself. Think deeply about the recent global health crisis. When the entire economic system was pushed to the absolute brink of collapse, it was not the venture capitalists, the corporate board of directors, or the management consultants who kept human civilization functioning. It was the grocery store clerks, the nurses, the delivery drivers, and the logistics workers. In that moment of extreme crisis, the essential workers were undeniably revealed to be the true base of the economic machine, while the so-called visionaries retreated to their luxury bunkers. The masses are the ultimate creators of both material wealth and the foundation for all spiritual and cultural riches. In your daily office life, the underlying dynamics are exactly the same. The chief executive officer does not actually write the endless lines of code, manufacture the physical product on the assembly line, or endure the emotional drain of closing individual sales with difficult clients. The collective, silent, and often exhausting labor of the working class is the sole engine generating actual value. Yet, the capitalist relations of production are meticulously designed to siphon the credit and the financial rewards upward, leaving the true architects of the wealth feeling alienated and powerless. Why is it absolutely crucial for you to internalize this dialectical truth? Because, as long as you deeply believe in the myth of the corporate savior, you will always voluntarily devalue your own worth. You will suffer from chronic imposter syndrome, falsely believing that your daily contributions are insignificant and easily replaceable. But once you radically awaken to the fact that the masses, that you and your ordinary colleagues, are the ultimate architects of reality, the psychological power dynamic instantly shifts. You begin to realize that the corporation desperately needs your labor far more than you need their hollow culture or their pizza parties. You stop seeking external validation from a hierarchy designed to diminish you. You are not a passive byproduct of history, nor are you a replaceable cog in a benevolent leader's master plan. You are the very foundation upon which the entire superstructure is built, and recognizing that collective strength is the first step toward true workplace emancipation. Chapter Summary. The masses are the sole creators of historical wealth and progress. By deconstructing the corporate worship of visionary leaders, we can reclaim the inherent power and dignity of our own daily labor. Chapter 5. The inevitable crisis, reform, revolution, and the death of the old order. Every structural system in the universe, whether it is a star, a biological organism, or a global financial empire, can only endure internal stress for a finite period before it reaches a mathematical breaking point. As we have established, the modern workplace and the broader capitalist machine are defined by inescapable contradictions. The relentless drive for endless profit directly collides with the finite physical and psychological limits of the human worker. The exponential growth of artificial intelligence collides with a wage system that still requires human labor to function. These are not temporary glitches. They are deep, tectonic fault lines, built into the very foundation of the system. In dialectical materialism, this phenomenon is governed by the immutable law of the transformation of quantity into quality. Water does not boil gradually. It absorbs heat incrementally until it reaches 100 degrees Celsius, at which point it violently and irreversibly transforms into steam. Human society operates on the exact same mechanical principle. For decades, we have witnessed the slow, grinding quantitative accumulation of economic friction. We have watched the staggering divergence between stagnant hourly wages and exponential corporate profits. We have endured the cyclical financial crashes of 2008 and the global health disruptions of 2020, each time allowing the superstructure to temporarily patch the bleeding wounds with trillions of dollars in synthetic fiat currency. But quantitative accumulation cannot be suppressed forever. When the internal contradictions reach critical mass, society must undergo a qualitative leap. The old order cannot merely be adjusted. It must be entirely shed, like the obsolete skin of a serpent. This brings us to the most feared and misunderstood concept in macroeconomic history: class struggle. We are thoroughly conditioned by the modern superstructure to view class struggle as an outdated, radical relic of the 19th century, or as a disgraceful breakdown of civilized protocol. Corporate media insists that we are all a unified middle class, temporarily embarrassed millionaires, just waiting for our individual turn at the top. Historical materialism strips away this comforting delusion. Class struggle is not a moral failing. It is the mandatory physical mechanism through which society resolves its ultimate bottlenecks. When the existing relations of production, the elitist rules governing who owns the data, the algorithms, and the real estate, become a complete straitjacket strangling the development of the productive forces, conflict becomes mathematically inevitable. The working masses must push against the boundaries imposed by the elite owners simply to ensure their own biological and psychological survival. How does this rupture occur? History dictates two primary avenues: reform and social revolution. Reform operates as the pressure valve. It occurs when the ruling class, recognizing the tremendous heat building within the engine, makes concessions to prevent a total meltdown. They implement labor laws, minimum wage increases, or anti-monopoly regulations. Reform is a gradual reshaping of the superstructure designed to extend the lifespan of the existing base. However, there exists a terrifying historical threshold where reform is no longer sufficient. When extreme wealth inequality concentrates the absolute majority of global resources into the hands of a microscopic elite, the system loses its elasticity. The elite become entrenched, refusing to surrender even a fraction of their power, blindly defending their obsolescent paradigm while the foundation crumbles beneath them. This is when social revolution detonates. Revolution is not simply a transfer of political office. It is the violent, foundational demolition of the old economic base and the erection of an entirely new paradigm. It is the qualitative leap, executed without anesthetic, as we navigate the late stages of the current financial order, characterized by staggering wealth gaps and the illusion of peaceful political transitions. We must recognize the relentless drumbeat of historical inevitability, the friction generated by unprecedented technological disruption and severe wage stagnation guarantees that the system must eventually snap, whether through aggressive structural reform or the unforgiving, cases of systemic collapse, the contradictions must be resolved. By understanding this macro dialectic, you shift your perspective from passive fear to cold preparation. You stop viewing corporate layoffs, economic recessions, and deep societal unrest as random disasters and start recognizing them as the painful, necessary spasms of a dying old order, trying desperately to hold back the inevitable birth of the new. Chapter Summary. When economic contradictions and wealth inequality accumulate beyond the mathematical limits of the system, society must undergo a violent qualitative transformation. Class struggle and systemic crisis are not anomalies, but the inevitable mechanics of shedding an obsolete order. Chapter 6. The Pragmatic Emancipation. Applying dialectics to work and life. We have analyzed the grand machinery of global history and the cold logic of systemic cycles. But philosophy is sterile if it cannot be applied to the reality of your own existence. Having deconstructed the corporate superstructure, we must now bring dialectical materialism directly into your daily life. You are not a passive victim of the machine. You are a conscious participant who can master its internal logic. To survive the disintegrating order, you must stop treating workplace conflict as a personal tragedy and start treating it as a precise science of contradictions. Personal sovereignty begins with identifying the primary contradiction in your existence. According to materialist dialectics, every complex system contains multiple conflicts, but only one dictates the movement of the whole. In your professional life, you are constantly distracted by secondary contradictions. A rude colleague, a messy desk, or a failed minor project, the primary contradiction of your 9-to-5 existence is the absolute tension between your biological need for personal development and the capitalist machine's need to extract your surplus value. When you identify this, your strategy changes. You stop seeking workplace happiness, which is an ideological mirage created by the superstructure, and you start strategically managing the extraction of your own time. You work to acquire the resources necessary to fuel your true human essence outside of the office. Beyond identifying contradictions, you must master the art of quantitative accumulation that leads to a qualitative leap. In the same way that water absorbs heat until it reaches the boiling point, you must view your skills, your network, and your financial buffers as quantitative data points. The smartest predators in the global economy, such as Warren Buffett, are currently hoarding massive amounts of pure liquidity, surpassing $380 billion, while waiting for the systemic reset. You must apply this exact logic to your career. You do not resign in a moment of emotional impulse. Instead, you methodically accumulate quantitative leverage, hard technical skills, physical assets, and liquid capital only when the quantity of your private power reaches critical mass. Execute the qualitative leap, a radical pivot into independence, moving you to a higher state of human development. This framework extends to the law of the unity and struggle of opposites, a principle that transforms how you navigate workplace conflict. Your conflict with a toxic manager or a ruthless competitor is not an isolated event. It is a necessary movement of social reality. In any economic machine, the interests of the holder of capital and the provider of labor are always in a state of productive tension. Do not take office politics personally. View every friction point as an opportunity to map the internal vulnerabilities of the organization. Use the struggle to refine your own tactics. When you realize that both you and the machine are inseparable yet opposing forces, you gain the emotional detachment required to negotiate from a position of absolute reality rather than desperate emotion. And to complete this shift in perspective, you must embrace the negation of the negation. History proves that every stage of development must be overcome to reach a higher form. Your current role in the workplace is not your final destination. It is a necessary stage that must ultimately be negated to allow for your comprehensive development. A career failure or a sudden redundancy is not an end. It is the dialectical negation of your current limitations, forcing you to reconstruct your life using the lessons learned from the previous era. This is the architecture of continuous self-transformation. Chapter Summary. By applying the laws of contradiction, quantitative accumulation, and the negation to your daily work, you transform from a passive cog into a strategic master of your own material reality, turning the science of history into a toolkit for personal freedom. Ending reflection. You now possess the ultimate conceptual toolkit to decode the matrix of your daily grind. You understand that the corporate machine is designed to extract your value, and that your workplace anxiety is a structural feature of the base, not a psychological bug in your mind. Just as the British Empire used the gold standard to harvest the wealth of nations, and modern financial titans are currently exiting the paper markets to secure tangible physical reality, you must now decide how to manage your own life force within this great cycle. With the lens of historical materialism, you are no longer a blind, passive gear in the engine. You can see the invisible chains of ownership and the fragility of the 80-year order. As you step back into the office tomorrow morning, a profound choice remains. Will you continue to let the superstructure dictate your self-worth and exhaust your human essence in the service of a dying paradigm? Or will you use the science of contradictions to play the game on your own terms, strategically accumulate your power, and become the conscious architect of your own emancipation? The tide is receding, and the machine is overheating. The question is not whether the order will change, but where you will be standing when the dust settles. Are you a historical accident being swept away by the current, or are you a historical necessity preparing to lead the next stage of development? Subscribe to this channel to arm yourself for the shift. The new order is coming. The only question is whether you are ready to control it.